A Wade in the Water. Chapter 10, Lest I Be a Castaway. Jasper lay there as we prayed, assuming, alas, that he was unaware of our presence. The healing prayer service continued, and Jasper moved silently on his bed. I wonder how many people have done this very thing with no indication of a change. Jasper had been in a terrible car accident and was traumatized with a severe head injury. He basically laid there for years, non-responsive. Jasper was conscious on some levels, it was sure. But when I came to the hospital room, Jasper was ready to arm wrestle with me. He would pull with all of his might and then roll his eyes back to a place of satisfaction. He had won the contest, and somehow he knew it. As the missionaries continued their visits, Jasper would respond differently. His sheet fell away from his chest one evening, and tattooed over his heart were the words, "Othello forever." Those who knew Jasper as a child wept at seeing the pain that must have been associated with those words. Othello was Jasper's mother, who had been murdered violently. Sweat rings dried under the arms of her beautiful purple silk blouse that she had on as she lay in bed. Blood and stains covered her bed floor walls and numerous items leading to her bathroom. Shots rang out from the apartment as someone killed the mother of 5 little boys. The murderer staged the scene to make it look like Othello had committed suicide. But the evidence proved different. I would visit Jasper at the hospital along with the others, and he had already been in his mental degeneration and physical position for many years. We, however, were always encouraged by the little things he did while we visited. Most of us were hoping it was a sign of him coming back and miraculously awakening. Unfortunately, through the life changes and circumstances, I moved to a different city. I didn't see him or hear of Jasper for many years afterwards. After a good while, I was advised that he had passed. While sitting and thinking about Jasper passing, thoughts began to flood back into my mind. They were so strong that I realized I had suppressed some intense and sorrowful memories. Years before Jasper's accident, his mother, Othello, and his sister and I sang at church. Othello's younger sister and I did almost everything at school together. At one big church meeting we attended, we had several guest churches come to visit. One of the visiting missionaries spoke and blessed everyone with great words of encouragement. She was always beautiful and had a lovely smile. Her husband was a good preacher, and he spoke that evening right after we sang. I knew them a bit better than some of the other youth because they were my neighbors. I often walked past their house on the way to the grocery store. Their sons would often be in the yard or playing in the street. We would speak and chat sometimes, but mostly I would just wave. I began to remember trying times prevailed during that season. Coming up to the funeral, it was scary and sad. Scary because no one really knew what had happened to Othello. No one believed she had killed herself at all. She lived in a Los Angeles community, and as the family prepared to leave their cities to go there, my friend's mom asked if I could come along and keep her company. My mother said yes, and we stayed away for almost a week. The young children and teens all stayed upstairs, and the adults hung out downstairs. They had the viewing that Friday, and we all went to Rutgers Mortuary. It was so hard seeing my friend and her family crying that I almost fainted. We returned to the family home and stayed up there in bed until they called us down for dinner. As we walked down the stairs, poking and laughing, in front of the stairway at the base of the stairs was a sofa. A man was sitting with his legs crossed, sipping a glass of wine and smoking a cigarette. He was hugged up with a lady trying to kiss her neck. I didn't think much of it because they were grown people. As we laughed and stepped down, he looked up into my face. It was the visiting pastor, my neighbor, and that was not his wife. I had known them almost all of my life. He almost choked. He stared at me, and I stared back at him. Scoping the position he was in, he looked panicked. I said, "Hello?" And he replied, "Hi." As my friend walking behind me looked at his face, she was in shock. The grown-ups were rushing us to the kitchen to get a plate of food. She came through the door and almost knocked me down. "Girl, isn't that the pastor in there on the sofa?" "Yep." If only you can imagine us and our unbelief. "He doesn't live down here. What is he doing here?" You should have seen us spying, peeking through the kitchen door, looking back. We were afraid to walk back past him. Finally, the adults chased us out of the kitchen. As we were coming back to go upstairs, they were leaving together. He looked back at us because he knew us both. He turned quickly and left. That was a stressful night of restless sleep. Talking, moaning. What was that? Oh no. Oh boy. Within hours, it was funeral time. We had convinced ourselves that he would not dare show up again since he knew we saw him. We greeted our friends who had come. We had to sing at the funeral, and Lord help us, he was right there sitting and looking at us. I had tried to be strong, but as we passed by the body, I fainted. Pow! They hit me in the face with something that was stinging my eyes. When I opened them, they were carrying me outside, and my friends had run to help me. I didn't know what had happened. They told me I had just fallen to the floor, and they hit me with smelling salts to wake me. We returned the next day to our homes. I thought, I will never be able to walk that direction past his house again to the grocery store. Several times I managed to slip by and not encounter him. I opted to walk the long way to the store and avoided his house. Like the plague lived there. My friend and I were too afraid to tell others about him being there in that compromising position. Every mention we heard of him afterwards was that he was sickly. We felt, oh really? Sick or just slick? God gives a grace to his people because of his great love for us all. He warns us to stop and correct our ways. We find an even higher requirement on the leaders, clergy, pastors, and priests. When we snub our noses and refuse to heed his warnings, that's when they have to deal with the exposure. God's covering gets lifted because of disobedience. And there you will stand naked and open to shame. Some months later, after this exposure, things turned tragic. To be continued in The Dancing, Shouting Cowboy, Shepherd of Love. May God rest the souls of Othello and Jasper. A Wade in the Water. Chapter 10. Castaway.